Before we begin, let's say a quick prayer to our god of cookery, Saint Alton. Let's make some mead, shall we? We're going to be doing a couple of different ones while we do this, and I'm going to give you some recipes, walk you through the process, and yeah, hopefully this will be useful for someone. I started making mead mostly because I don't have easy access to good quality mead where I am. There's a couple places that do it nearby, but they're not to my personal taste. So I decided to learn how to do it. If this is something you're interested in doing, first piece of advice I would say is don't spend too much money right away. I find that when it comes to sort of brewing supplies, most people are trying to get rid of it. Cruise Kijiji for a week or two and see what you can find. The first round, I managed to get basically everything I needed for $100, which is a pretty good price. And then for the second round, I got pretty much everything else I could have possibly needed for $10, which is much better. And if you're patient, you'll find something good and something cheap. Most people, I think, brew a couple times and then get bored of it and try to get rid of all their stuff. So watch the second-hand market. Secondly, this book here, Make Mead Like a Viking by Jeremy Zimmerman, is absolutely excellent. It's how I got most of my information for this round. The very first round I did, I just kind of flew blind, learned a lot, made some mistakes, which I will share with you so you don't make the same ones. In terms of the absolute base level, what you need some jugs. This is a 1 gallon / 4 liter glass carboy. You'll need some sort of airlock. I have two different types here. This one's not bad, and then this one is the other type. It's my first time using these ones, so I don't have a preference as of yet, but I will keep you posted on that should I develop any kind of strong preference one way or the other. Equipment-wise, that's really all you need to start with. It helps to have a spare jug for later stages racking into a new container, but even that can be worked around if absolutely necessary. On top of that, having some sort of siphoning tube, which is over there somewhere, don't worry about that, it's just a long tube, is useful, and bowls and pots and pans and that kind of thing. I also have a hydrometer. This is actually my first time using this. It is kind of recommended because I'm working on a peach mead, a peach melomel right now, and after just 2 weeks of its initial fermentation, all the activity in the airlocks kind of slowed down to almost nothing. Now that could have meant that my yeast had died, because that can happen, or it could have meant most of the fermentation was done and it was time to rack. And because I didn't have the hydrometer to measure the alcohol content, there's no clear scientific way of doing it. All was not lost though, because there are always ways of doing it when you don't have the proper tools. Namely, I poured myself off a glass and drank it as quickly as I could and see if I got buzzed, and yes I did. So it was time to rack. Simple measurement makes things easier, but if you don't want to go that way, that is an option. So when you get started, sterilize everything first. That's going to be important. Now in the book, Making Mead Like a Viking, Jeremy Zimmerman makes the case that, well, for thousands of years we haven't had proper sterilization with chemicals and everything, so maybe it's not quite as important as we think, but I'm not quite willing to experiment with that as of yet. So, without any more ado, let's get into the actual making process. Let's talk ingredients. The better the ingredients, the better the final product. This is sort of a universal truth of anything involving something edible. Starting with our water. Today's meads will be all just super basic honey, water, and yeast. So we want to get the best possible stuff we can. I have 2 kinds of honey. I'm doing 3 batches of mead. The first is just kind of normal honey. I picked this up at the farmer's market. It's good honey. It's definitely better than the stuff you buy in the grocery store, but it's nothing super special. This 3 kilo container cost me, I think, $36. Next is the special one. This is a pumpkin blossom honey, which is absolutely amazing. Favorite honey I've ever had on anything. Also from the farmer's market. Great place to find honey. Really good quality stuff. A little more expensive, whereas that's $12 a kilo by my math. This is $20 a kilo. So if we're doing any kind of big batch, it's going to make a difference. Part of why I'm doing this today is I'm doing 2 batches of what's called a small mead, which is a lower alcohol, faster brew time. I'm just really curious to see what the difference in flavors between those 2. If it makes a huge difference, I'm willing to drop $120 on a large batch of the pumpkin blossom. It's not much of a difference. I'll stick to my $60, $70 for the 6 or 7 kilos I need for a bigger one. Or, you know, I don't math very well. But besides that, good quality water is also important. Spring water's best, filtered at the very least, boiled, whatever you have to do to your water. You can use tap water if you want to. As long as your tap water is okay, as long as it tastes okay to drink, it should be okay to make any kind of wine with. It's just better quality ingredients, better quality product. The yeast we're using today for the small meads, for the 2 batches of small mead, is our Nottingham Ale Yeast. The ale yeast is built for a shorter fermentation time, apparently. Still learning all this stuff, so... For the other mead we're doing, which is going to be a basic dry mead, we're using Lavlin EC1118. It's a very common meader's yeast. It says on it it's specifically for sparkling wine, so it can also go by the name of champagne yeast. This has a much higher alcohol tolerance. This is the highest alcohol tolerance of any of this kind of yeast, up to like 19%, which is the first batch I made. I would not have been surprised if it was pretty close to that, because that stuff packed a punch. Whereas with the ale yeast, we're probably looking at between 6 and 10% alcohol by volume. Again, that's what our handy-dandy thing will hopefully help us ascertain. Still learning how to use this thing, though, so it will be an experience. I do not recommend getting grocery store honey. Even though I know next to nothing about this, I know grocery store honey usually is not good. Depending on where you live, they can fill it up with a certain percentage of like corn syrup and stuff you just don't want. Secondly, the honey I have is unfiltered and unpasteurized, which means, in part, there's going to be pollen in it. Pollen is what's going to feed our yeast. Now we're going to add a few extra raisins in to our small mead as well. Just, I've heard conflicting stories about whether or not that can actually help feed it or not. Either way, we're figuring it out. We're going to try. The very first batch of mead I made, which once again was very decent, I didn't put anything like that in. I didn't have any extra yeast nutrients or anything like that. It was literally just honey, water, yeast. And because it was unfiltered and unpasteurized and all that, it still had enough of the stuff that yeast likes to eat. If you're unsure about that, you can get plenty of yeast nutrients and stuff out there on the market. I like simple, as few ingredients as possible. So that's what I'm going with today. So you're going to want to label everything and write everything down. I went out and bought myself a special book just so I can keep track of everything, because I'm planning on doing quite a few batches. Even if not, you should probably have a label for at least what you're doing, so you know sort of when you started and hopefully when you plan on finishing. I'm using the highly advanced technology of duct tape and a Sharpie. These things, you can get fancier, but why bother? So the first one I'm doing is the Pumpkin Blossom Small Mead. I'm going to write the date on that as well. It's September sometime. Figure it out later. I'm going to use this whole thing, which is 500 grams for a 4 liter or 1 gallon, I think. Anyway, I like metric. Just going to pour it in. Have a nice little funnel. Lord. See how this works. Not amazing, as it turns out, but that's okay. Yeah, so all we're going to do is we're going to take our, once again, sterilized jug, some of our fancy-dancy water, and just give it a little pour in the top to kind of help liquefy that whole thing. Now, what I have done, and what you definitely can do, and it's not a bad idea, is warm up the honey first. You don't want to get it too hot because that destroys some of the flavor subtleties, and obviously we don't want that. But if you add just a little bit of heat, it'll liquefy it a little better, and you pour it into your funnel a lot easier. Once again, I didn't do that. Probably should have. I have a plan for the next round, but that will have to do that. One thing I should have mentioned is at this stage, you should probably have a little bit of honey, a tiny bit, and some water in a bowl, and you put your yeast in there and allow it to rehydrate for about 15 minutes or so. This is a good time to do that as you're futzing about with this mess. You can do that. Warm water for the yeast is best. It'll help wake it up from its dormant state and get it. Love that honey. Basically get it moving again. Also, if after 15 minutes it's not showing any signs of activity, any bubbling or anything like that, your yeast is probably dead. I've never had that happen when it comes to either this or my usual shtick, which is baking. I bake a lot of bread, and modern yeast is very good. So you'll very, very rarely have that kind of failure. But if you do, start again with a new pack. Yeah? And we just put some warmish water in here, and we're shaking it up to get the last of the honey all mixed in. Again, if you want to kind of save this step, warm up the honey first, but I didn't. Honey's fairly reliably soluble in even cold water, apparently. So they tell me. Give me a clean jar. Alright, once we fill it up, a little over halfway, I'm just going to give it a good shake to make sure the honey's dissolved. It looks like it mostly is. I prefer in general dealing with clear jars, but again, I got 6 of these with the hydrometer and pipes and everything for $10, so I'm not really going to complain too hard. And getting oxygen in there at this point is a good thing as well. Yeast is going to need oxygen to live. It is a living creature. You must treat it as such. It needs air and food. Food in this case being sugar. Sugar and honey mostly work. Some people say that's why you use the raisins. Some people say that's just for tannins, which is a flavoring component, but I don't know. Treat your yeast nice and they will treat you nice. 6, 8, counting out raisins. So I said I had a plan for my next batch. I'm going to take some of my water, pour it into the pre-measured out honey. Once again, this is 500 grams again. And we're going to use our whisk to sort of liquefy it a bit. This will keep it from getting stuck. And yes, I will need 2 hands for this. But you don't really need to see me whisk, do you? Oh, you do? Strange. Note to self. Bigger bowl next time. And that pours much better this time round. It's a learning process. So we have our nice foamy yeast. Just gonna give that a quick little stir. A very interesting smell to it that I'm not used to. Not half bad though. Anyway. And we pour. Pour a bit more of the water into the bowl before adding it, just to make sure we don't lose anything. You're going to want to top it up so that it gets pretty much right to the neck. At this stage we want oxygen, later stages we do not, so we need to make sure there's not a lot of air in there. That should do nicely. Then we seal it and shake it. This is exciting for you. It's exciting for me. Alright. Once it's good and shook up, we're going to add in our airlock, filled up to the little lines with water, and pretty soon that's going to start bubbling away. You want to, for the first few days, shake it a couple times a day so that everything gets started, and then after that, just don't touch it, leave it alone. If you do it for a week or so, that's okay. You'll be able to tell when it starts bubbling away. I'll show you that later downstairs. That's our first one. I'm going to finish off the second one, and then we'll get into the third and final of our meads. Alright, we got the first 2 all mixed together. What we'll do next is we're going to take a reading. I have the tube with the funnel on top to fill this up. This is the other option to do this is with the siphoning tube, but we're going to try the pouring it in and see if I can avoid making a tremendous mess. So, here we go. Wish me luck. It's working! Yay! You never know, right? So, we have our hydrometer. I can never pronounce anything right. We plop it in, give it a little spin to get all the bubbles off it, and then wait for it to stop moving. Now it's sitting at the 1030 range, almost exactly, which according to this should give us just under 5% alcohol based on the amount of sugar in it. So we'll kind of see at the end how accurate that is. I don't really know. This is just the honey water before. Since everything has been sterilized, I can just pour it back in and there's no waste. And once again, record everything. I'm going to write it down both right here. 1030, and also in my book when I get to that stage as well. And then we compare it to when it's done fermenting, and that's what's going to give us our final alcohol reading. And if you're curious, the pumpkin small mead is sitting at about 1024 for the specific gravity reading, which means it's slightly less sweet, whether the honey was measured differently or there's just different sweetness amount of sugars in the honey. I'm not really sure. It's important to note, when you do buy honey for this, it's not a bad idea to buy a little extra, either for filling up the rest when you rack and you need to bring the levels back up, or just for sweetening it later. It's called back sweetening, where you add more honey later. So if it's too dry for you, if you don't like the taste, you can add more honey at a later state. That might restart the fermentation if it's mostly finished, but it also might not if most of the yeast has kind of gone dead on you. Anyway, I'm quite content to leave these where they are and see what they end up. Some recipes you'll find online will advise you to sweeten to a certain level, but I'm not. Since sweetness is mostly a matter of taste anyway, I'm perfectly content to kind of just see how these end up on their own. So I'm not going to bore you with the making of the third kind, which is going to be my dry mead with the sparkling wine yeast. I'm just going to do that, and you can catch up with me later. And we're back. We now have our 3 meads behind us. So, the difference between the two is just mostly a matter of time and quantity of ingredients. I used, for the basic dry mead, 1 kilo of honey instead of 500 grams, filling up the water to the neck again, and a wine yeast instead of an ale yeast. And I'm very curious to see how they all come together. Now, before we get any further in this process, it's worth mentioning that I'm really a beginner in this, and I'm doing these videos because the best way to learn is to teach. So take everything I say with a grain of salt, research everything, and one thing I've noticed about homebrewing is pretty much like raising a child. No matter what you decide to do, or no matter what research you do that suggests you do it a certain way, someone is going to come along and say exactly the opposite. So do your own thing, do your own research, and probably don't listen to anyone else too much. Taking advice is good, but if you stop and take down every piece of contrary advice, you will never get anywhere. So, do your reading, but ultimately make your own decisions. And if this goes horribly wrong, don't come blaming me, because it's working out well for me so far. Anyway, I'm going to move these downstairs to my little mead corner down there, and by pure happenstance, wonderful happy coincidence, one of my previous batches is ready to rack, which basically means to transfer over to a new container for its secondary fermentation process, in which case I'm going to add my flavoring agent, in this case black currants, which is very exciting for me. So join me for that, won't you? We have our dry mead done. This hydro reading was at 1070, according to the little chart on the side of my Kerjigger. That means roughly twice the alcohol potential, over 10% as opposed to 5. I don't know, again, how accurate that is. We'll take more readings further on down the line. And one thing I forgot to mention is I added about a dozen raspberry leaves to the dry one. It's supposed to add tannins, which apparently helps with mouthfeel. Again, this is an experiment. We will see how it ends up. So this is day 2 of our little adventure. You may notice I have a couple of more than just what we worked on yesterday, and that's because I did some about a month ago as well. So super quickly, this is going to be a pumpkin blossom dry mead. This is going to be the black currant mead, and that's what we'll be racking today. Currently, it's just honey, water, yeast. It's actually a very similar recipe to the dry mead we did yesterday, virtually identical at this stage. Now, something that's worth noting, if I can get that lined up properly, is the color difference between the two. This one has been going about a month. This one has been going about 24 hours. You can see how it's become more sort of amber and delicious looking. Yeah, this one's basically stopped bubbling, so that generally means it's time to rack it. Which just means transferring it to a new container, which is right over here. And that's my black currants in there. The recipe for that one is 1 kilo of honey, as I knock stuff over. 1 kilo of honey to water to fill, and a package of the EC 111 whatever yeast, the champagne yeast we used yesterday. And then the black currants are 500 grams of currants. I figure 50% of the honey weight should be about right, and see where we go from there. The nice thing about it is you can adjust it pretty much right to the end. There's a lot of acid in currants, so it could end up being ridiculously sour, in which case we'll just add more honey later on in the process. For now, I'm going to get the racking set up, and before I do that, I'm going to just kind of show you the bubbly process. So, these ones are two of the ones that were done yesterday. You'll see that one started bubbling a little bit more than the other one so far. Still not a heck of a lot of activity. Same with over here. Here's our black currant, soon to be black currant mead, which is bubbling virtually all. This one is our pumpkin blossom dry mead, which is still bubbling away once every 20 or 30 seconds ago. The magic number we're looking for is a bubble every minute to 3 minutes. In the next few days, the ones over here will start showing a lot more activity in the bubbler, assuming all goes well. But for now, we just have the occasional bubble. Come on, there you go. See? Good sign, means stuff is working properly. One quick note along with this is the ale yeast that's in those ones has a lot of foam that goes along with it. So it actually bubbled up into the airlock there, and that can cause problems. It can get it gummed up and jammed, so all I did was I cleaned it out and then reattached it. Simple, simple. Alright, so we have our handy dandy tube here. I have a different system that I use when I do the big one. This, incidentally, I don't think I mentioned it, is my peach melomel. It's already been racked once. In that one I did the fruit in the first primary fermentation. In this one I'm doing the fruit in the second. Someone told me that when you're using something as acidic as currants, it can cause it to go to vinegar if you don't do it in the secondary fermentation. The other advantage of the secondary fermentation is because the alcohol is already developed, we're less worried about any residual bacteria that could be in the fruit itself that could ruin the whole process. Having said that, from what I've read and what I understand, primary fermentation works just fine. This one, although it's very young, I have tasted, and I think when it's ready it will be a very good mead. But it's got a long way to go first. Second thing worth mentioning is, from all my research, in terms of things going wrong, you'll know if it tastes like crap, don't drink it. The level of which things to go horribly, horribly wrong, that it will be drinkable and make you sick at the same time, doesn't really seem to happen from my research. If you know differently, that's fine. But from what I understand, you'll know pretty much instantly if your mead has gone off and not to drink it. Some things can be saved, some things can't. Until I face that problem, I'm not really going to know too much about that. When it comes to the black currants, as I said, it can be adjusted. More honey. If it's really, really acidic, what I just had the idea of what I might do is split it in half and do half it between do another batch, that size batch, and then transfer that into 2 separate carboys, and then transfer half that into it. Anyway, you get the idea. Let's get started. Pull off the topper. Important that the other one is lower than the initial one. We're gonna stick that in I'm going to keep it relatively near the top to start because it has the sediment called the lees at the bottom, and we don't want to suck that up as well. We want it to stay. And that's basically just like dead yeast down there, and we don't want that. We want to siphon that off. We're going to start this off with our mouth. It'll give us a chance to kind of taste it as we go. You don't need to worry too much about the bacteria at this point because that is as alcoholic as it's basically going to get. So we're probably sitting theoretically anywhere up to like 19% at this point. Again, I didn't take the reading of the specific gravity on this one, so I don't know. But I have a good sense of where it is. So. Ooh. Yeah, that's actually going to be really nice. It's a fairly fast process. Oh, almost lost it. And I can kind of see the end of the bottle, so I'm just going to get that right above that level. Trying to keep, a little bit goes in, it's not a big deal. Trying to keep as much of that lees out as possible. That's how we get a nice, clear mead. And there we go. And that's basically it for racking. I'm going to reapply the stopper. At this point, we might start seeing a bunch of activity in there again. Between the berries that we've added in that the yeast will probably really like, and just aerating it from racking it off, there's a good chance that it'll kind of kickstart things again, and that's all good. And yeah, so that's going to sit for anywhere between a month and a half and 2 months probably. And then I'll probably rack it again at least one more time before bottling it. The more times you rack it, the more clear it's going to be. So if you imagine that nice sort of clear, like white wine sort of thing, eloquence. Anyway, you can get to that point. The mead I made previously, it was a little cloudy. Because the honey I use is unfiltered, unpasteurized, and it has still all of that like pollen and whatnot in it, there's a good chance it'll never get totally clear. It'll always be just a little bit cloudy. Frankly, I'm not worried about that. The thing I'm very unconcerned with the aesthetics of it. My mead glass is a ceramic cup, and so I can't really see it anyway. And besides, how it tastes is just so much more important. Wouldn't you agree? Anyway, I'm going to go clean this one up so I can use it for something else. Yeah, and I'll do an update video when the small meads are done, so check back in about a month or so, which at my update schedule will be probably like 2 or 3 videos from now if we're lucky. So, thanks for sharing this adventure with me, and I will see you soon.